est-ce que votre C20, C30, C40 se substitue à ce triangle? Et où se situe la légitimité démocratique? Est-ce qu'il n'y a pas le risque que certains adeptes de la théorie du complot y voilà une nouvelle trilatérale?
The G20 has a leadership capacity but zero legitimacy and zero efficiency. That the UN have a maximum of legitimacy but zero leadership and zero efficiency. And that international organizations have a wealth of expertise and know-how but zero legitimacy and zero leadership. So, stemming from this, let's say, sketchy description of the international system, I thought at the time that the best thing was that each of these specialize in their comparative advantage. So the G20 should specialize in leadership, the UN should specialize in legitimacy, and international organizations should specialize in expertise and know-how. Hence this triangle, which, by the way, we started to organize, for instance, between the G20 and the UN. There is now a sort of reporting line that, even if it is dotted and depends a bit on the chair of the G20 and the chair of the UNGA, but this exists. There are connections between the G20 and international organizations, not least because the DG of WTO, the DG of ILO, the OECD SecGen, the president of the World Bank, the managing director of the IMF, sit around the table of the G20. Now, that's something which I think is a possible pragmatic direction. Now, on your legitimacy issue, we discussed it when we tried to invent this sort of new operational formulas. And my answer to the question is between the theory that international relations should remain the monopoly of sovereigns because these sovereigns have political legitimacy, which is the principle of the international system, and the practice, there is a huge difference. If that was true, the climate change negotiations would be done. If these 200 members of the UNGA, given what they say about climate change, were able to bring their people on board, we would have had an agreement on climate change 10 years ago. So, legitimacy is not just a principle. Legitimacy means that you speak for the people who gave you the power to speak for them, but you also can bring them along. And that obviously doesn't work. So in many ways, because legitimacy is a direct function of proximity, there is a huge cost in moving power further from the people. We all know that. It's the good old principle of subsidiarity. And the more you globalize issues, the more you move power from the people. So the way to legitimize the necessary political energy if you want to address overfishing or climate change is go back to those who have legitimacy. Now, some public institutions have legitimacy, and by the way, if megacities are becoming major elements of international governance today, it's because their own legitimacy is higher than sovereign nation states. Civil society organizations are legitimacy builders for themselves, first, because like any power system, they like having this power and increasing it, but also for the interests which they represent. Same on the side of business. There is, in a multinational, there is a way to coordinate the interests of shareholders, the interest of consumers, the interest of workers, which in many ways is a coalition in itself. So, to answer your question, I think we shouldn't be too formal. At the end of the day, what matters if take climate change or overfishing, what matters is that we start doing something about this issue we will all agree is a big problem, and we, nevertheless, because we are locked into the existing international system, we just cannot address, which A, creates frustrations, but B, is a potential problem for 10, 20, 30 years now, which we better fix before generations think that we really screwed it. There is a UN Chief Executive Board, and I was a member of that during 8 years, because WTO DG is part of this big table around which between 20 and 30 people sit. But one condition for the UN Chief Executive Board to be efficient is that sovereign nation states know nothing about it. The moment, imagine the situation where I would have had to report to the General Council of WTO what I said or what others said around the table of the UN Chief Executive Board. It would have been a nightmare. And same for my colleagues, the IMF or the World Bank or the World Population Fund or the UNDP or UNEP. I mean, it's a fundamental contradiction. It can be a very effective way of increasing coherence within the international system, which, as we all know, is a big issue, but with one condition, which is that you don't ask a mandate to your members to increase coherence. I know what happens if the boss of international institutions goes to his membership and says, I want a mandate to increase coherence with others. The reaction will be, that's not for you. That's for us. We are the coherence makers, which is why I sometimes define sovereignty today as the monopoly of incoherence.